Ahoy! The classic fairy tales by Iona and Peter Opie. Today's story is Cinderella, or The Little Glass Slipper. A little background. The story of Cinderella is undoubtedly the best known fairy story in the world, and it is a tale whose strangeness has apparently been a wonder to man for 1,000 years. The form of the tale popular today, in which a cinder girl is able to attend a ball through the benevolence of a fairy godmother, on condition that she returns before midnight, is due entirely to the skilled retelling of the tale, whether by Charles Perrault or Pierre Perrault, published in Histoire ou Contes du Temps Passé, Paris, 1697. Were it not for Perrault, father or son, the tale might now be known in Britain in a form such as Andrew Lang found it, being told a century ago, in Morayshire, in the north-east of Scotland. Revue Celtique, Volume 3, 1878. A king who had one lovely daughter, and whose wife had died, married for the second time an ill-natured woman with 3 ugly girls of her own, whose envy of the king's daughter was matched by their treatment of her. They made her sit in the kitchen nook, gave her a garment of rushes to wear so that everyone called her Ration Coatie, and allowed her nothing to eat but their leftovers. Ration Coatie was, however, not altogether troubled, because her mother, before she died, had given her a little red calf, and Ration Coatie had only to ask the red calf for anything she wanted, and she could have it. One day, nevertheless, her stepmother found out about the little red calf, and the good food the calf was bringing her, and ordered that the creature be butchered. Ration Coatie was grief-stricken, but the dead calf said to her, "Take me up, bane by bane, and pit me ineth yon grey stain." If she did this, it was suggested she would still be able to obtain whatever she wanted. Thus, when Yuletide came, and everyone put on their best clothes to go to the kirk, Ration Coatie had no fine clothes to wear, and was told she was too dirty a creature to go to the kirk, and must stay home to cook the dinner. When the others had set off for the kirk, Ration Coatie went to the grey stone and told the calf she wanted to go to the kirk too. The calf promptly provided her with broclés, and she was the grandest and brawest lady at the kirk. A young prince was there and fell in love with her, but Ration Coatie left before the blessing so as to be home before the others returned, and the prince was unable to speak to her. The next day, when they again went to the kirk, the same thing happened, and the prince was in love with her more than ever, but Ration Coatie again slipped away before the blessing. On the 3rd day, the prince kept guard at the kirk door. Ration Coatie had to jump to get past him, and in doing so lost one of her beautiful satin slippers. The young prince proclaimed he would marry whoever the satin slipper fitted. All the ladies in the land tried on the slipper, but not one could fit her foot into it. The henwife, the stepmother, then took her daughter and forced the slipper on her foot by cutting off her heels and toes, so the prince had to accept her. On the way to the kirk, however, a bird began to sing, and ever it sang, "Minced fit and pinched fit, beside the king she rides, but braw fit and bonny fit, in the kitchen nook she hides." The prince now realized someone had not yet tried on the shoe. Eventually, Ration Coatie came to him, and when she was near, the slipper jumped out of his pocket and onto her foot. The prince married her, and they all lived happily all their days. Several tales such as this, apparently a part of Scandinavian tradition, have been collected in Scotland, and John Lydon seems to have known the story, for he suggested that one of the tales in The Complaint of Scotland, 1540, was probably the groundwork of the fairy tale of the Pure Tint Rashi Coat, a common nursery tale. In Germany, too, the Grimm brothers found a similar group of tales. Their story, Aschenputtel, translated into English in 1826, was formed From three complementary tales current in Hesse. Aschenputtel was a girl in much the position of Rashenkoti. Her widowed father, a man of substance, had married again, and her stepmother and two stepsisters gave her an old grey bedgown to wear. They put her in the kitchen where she had to work from morn till night, and tormented her by emptying peas and lentils into the ashes for her to pick out. Aschenputtel, Cinderfool, remained faithful to the memory of her mother, however, on whose grave she had planted a hazel twig, the gift of her father, which had grown to be a great tree. On this tree perched a little white bird, which would bring her anything she wished. The king of that land decreed there should be a 3-day festival to which every beautiful girl should come, so that his son might choose a bride. The stepsisters, of course, went to the feast, leaving dowdy Aschenputtel behind. Aschenputtel would not stand for this. The heroines in these folk tales were not as passive as Perrault's Cinderella, and begged at her mother's grave for a gold and silver dress. In no time she, too, was off to the feast. The prince inevitably was charmed by her, and each day wished to see her home, but each day she escaped him. On the third day, however, the prince ordered the staircase to be smeared with pitch, a dirty trick for a prince, but it was partially successful, for one of Aschenputtel's golden slippers stuck in the pitch and was recovered. Thereupon the king's son announced he would marry no one but her whom the slipper fitted. The elder stepsister had a pretty foot, but when she tried on the slipper she found her big toe would not fit into it. Secretly, she obtained a knife and cut off her toe to make the shoe fit. The prince, believing he had found his bride, rode off with her, but as they were passing the grave, two pigeons in the hazel tree cried out, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe, it is too small for her, the true bride waits for you." The second stepsister then tried on the shoe, but found her heel too large. Secretly, she sliced off her heel so the shoe would fit. Again, the pigeons exposed the deceit. Eventually, Aschenputtel tried on the shoe. To the mortification of the stepsisters, the shoe fitted like a glove, and the prince rode away with her. At the wedding, the pigeons sat on Aschenputtel's shoulders, and as if the stepsisters had not suffered enough already, the pigeons pecked out the sisters' eyes while they were acting as bridesmaids. But this is a grim story. As it happens, one version of the Cinderella story had already appeared in English when Perrault's tale was translated. This was Madame d'Aulnoy's tale of Finetta the Cinder Girl, published in Volume 1 of her collection of novels and tales, 1721. The opening of that story much resembles Hansel and Gretel in that the parents attempt to do away with their children, at first unsuccessfully, by abandoning them in a forest. But after the three daughters have become lost, have sought refuge in an ogre's home, and have outwitted the ogre, the two elder sisters, enriched by the ogre's treasure, begin to live the grand life, leaving the youngest, Finetta, to do the housework. One night, however, Finetta discovers a little gold key among the ashes, which opens a chest packed with beautiful party dresses. She puts on one of the dresses and takes herself to a ball, where she dances to the admiration of all, but unrecognized by her sisters. This happens on several occasions, until one night she stays longer than ordinary, and in her hurry to be home before her sisters, she loses a slipper, one of which was of red velvet braided with pearls. The next day, the king's eldest son comes upon it when out hunting, and thinks the slipper so exquisite he resolves to marry no one but her who can wear it. Upon this, all the fine ladies of the court washed and pared their feet, and made choice of the thinnest stockings, that they might put on the slipper, but all to no purpose, since none of them could get it on. Among the would-be brides are the two elder sisters, who set off to court to try on the shoe, but on the way they are overtaken by Finetta, mounted on the fine Spanish horse provided by her fairy godmother, that in passing dashed them all over with dirt. However, when Finetta has shown that the shoe is hers, and the prince has proposed to her, she good-naturedly introduces her sisters to the court. This is a tale of the beau monde, and desires that they, too, shall be well received. The earliest Cinderella-type tale that has been found in Europe was published in Italy. This is the story of La Gatta Cenerentola, La Gatta Cenerentola, the hearth cat, which Basile included in the Pentamerone, Day 1, Tale 6. 1634. In this tale, a girl named Zezola is the only daughter of a prince who marries for the second time a woman of some unpleasantness. In this tale, however, the heroine's conduct is by no means exemplary. She plots with her governess to murder her stepmother. This is a feature of Middle Eastern variants of the tale, and successfully breaks her stepmother's neck by letting the lid of a great chest fall on her while she is looking at some old dresses. Thereafter she persuades her father to marry her governess, unaware that the woman has 6 daughters of her own. Zezola soon learns her mistake. The 6 stepdaughters are placed above her. Her milieu becomes the kitchen, and her name La Gatta Cenerentola. However, when her father returns from a journey abroad, he brings her, on the instructions of a fairy, a seedling date tree which she plants, and which in 4 days grows to the size of a woman. In this tree is a fairy who tells Zezola that whenever she wants to go out without being recognized, she has only to ask. Soon afterwards comes the day of the festa, for which everyone but Zezola prepares. Zezola runs to the tree and asks if she too can go. Instantly she finds herself attired like a queen, with a white horse to ride on and 12 pages to attend her. Now it happens that the king comes to the festa, and needless to say he is bewitched by Zezola's loveliness, and instructs a servant to find out where she lives. But Zezola notices she is being followed and scatters gold coins in the road, which the servant stops to pick up. On the next feast day, Zezola is again left by the hearthside, and this time the date tree provides her with a coach and 6 horses. The king is yet more anxious to learn her identity, but the servant who follows her is unable to resist picking up the jewels she lets fall. On the 3rd feast day, Zezola is provided with a coach of gold. The king's servant is instructed on no account to let her out of his sight, and Zezola, in her anxiety to escape, drops a beautiful stilted shoe she has been wearing, which the servant picks up. The king orders every woman in his realm to attend a banquet to find out whose foot the shoe fits, but no one can get it on. He then orders a second banquet, which must be attended even by the kitchen maid Zezola. When the shoe is near Zezola's foot, it darts forward of its own accord, as iron to a magnet. The king takes Zezola in his arms, places a crown upon her head, and commands everyone to make obeisance to her as their queen. Where the story of Cinderella originated is unknown, but Arthur Waley has pointed out that the earliest debatable version of the Cinderella story anywhere in the world occurs in a Chinese book written about 850 to 860 AD, and the resemblance of this tale to the stories recorded in Europe so many centuries later will be seen to be remarkable. Before the Qin and Han dynasties goes the story, which appears in Folklore, March 1947, there was a cave master called Wu, who was twice married, and by each of his wives had a daughter. One daughter, named Yehsen, was unusually clever, but her mother died, and when her father died too, she was sorely ill-treated by her stepmother, who kept her in tattered clothing and made her collect firewood in dangerous places and draw water from deep pools. Yehsian possessed a tame fish, which she had caught when it was 2 inches long, and which had grown to enormous size, more than 10 feet long. Yehsian kept the fish in a pool, and when she came to the water's edge, it used to pillow its head on the bank beside her. One day, her stepmother put on Yehsian's tattered dress and tricked the fish into putting its head down beside her, whereupon she killed and ate it. Yehsian was grief-stricken, but a man with long hair and coarse clothes came out of the sky and consoled her. He told her the bones of the fish had been buried under the dunghill, and if she collected them and kept them in her room, she only had to pray to them to obtain whatever she wished. When festival time came, the stepmother and her daughter left Yehsian behind to look after the fruit trees. Yehsian put on a cloak of kingfisher leathers and shoes of gold and followed them to the festival. However, the stepmother suspected who she was, and Yehsian rushed home. She left in such haste that one of her gold shoes fell off, and it was picked up by one of the cavemen. This man sold the shoe, and eventually it was acquired by the ruler of an island kingdom called Tohan. He ordered that every woman in his kingdom should try the shoe on, but the shoe, which was light as down and made no noise even when treading on stone, seems to have been an inch too small even for the smallest foot. The story becomes confused at this point, and the order of events is uncertain, but after a considerable search, Ye Xian is found. She puts on the shoe, is seen to be as beautiful as a heavenly being, and marries the king. In the meantime, her stepmother and stepsister have been killed by flying stones. This story was collected by a man named Chuan Cheng Shi, who must surely be one of the earliest of folktale collectors. He recorded he had learnt the story from one Li Shi Yuan, who had long been in the service of his family and who was himself originally a man from the caves in South China. It will be appreciated that none of these tales is likely to be of independent composition. Not only do they have details in common, but their structure and message is similar. In the Chinese tale, the long-haired man who comes from the sky to give Ye Xian magic advice can be compared with the fairy of the Italian story and the white bird of the German, while the fish of wonderful growth, like the date tree and the willow tree of wonderful growth in Italy and Germany, and the red calf in Scotland, whose bones had to be preserved in the same manner as the bones of the great fish, is the real source of the heroine's fortune. This is, indeed, in keeping with many other of the 700 tales of Cinderella that have been collected. A friendly animal or a bird, rather than a fairy, is the creature who succors the orphan, and it becomes clear that a creature is the spirit or reincarnation of her mother. Thereafter it appears that however much kings or princes are enamored of Cinderella while she is in her beauteous enchanted state, she cannot be won until, as in many another fairy tale, she has been recognized by her suitor in her mundane, degraded state. In none of these tales, it will be noted, may Cinderella reveal her identity, nor may any human being be a part to her secret. She must invariably return home from an outing before the rest of the family, and must resume her workaday appearance so that they do not know she has been out. She seems to be innately aware, if she has not received actual instruction, that if she is recognized in her beauteous state, she will never escape from her servitude. Thus, however much the prince or king may have the recollection of a vision of loveliness, it is essential in all but Madame d'Aulnoy's literary rendering of the tale that the royal suitor accepts her as his bride while she is in her humble state. Compare the Frog Prince. The only clue the prince is allowed to her identity is her lost shoe, or in some variants of the tale, a finger ring that fits her. The nature of the shoe itself seems to be of little significance. Very often it is made of silk or other material, and when Perrault heard the story, the shoe may well have been made of a variegated fur, as had been suggested, rather than of glass. It was his genius, nevertheless, to see how much more effective in the story would be a shoe of glass, a shoe which could not be stretched, and a shoe in which the foot could be seen to fit. There is no doubt he himself intended the shoe should be of glass. The tale in Contes du Temps Passé, 1697, is actually entitled Cinderella ou la petite pantoufle de verre. Pantoufle. Hyphens. The text that follows is Robert Samber's translation of Perrault's tale, which appeared in Histories or Tales of Past Times, published in London in 1729. All right. Cinderella, or the Little Glass Slipper. Here we go. There was once upon a time a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest and most haughty woman that ever was known. She had been a widow, and had by her former husband 2 daughters of her own humour, who were exactly like her in all things. He had also by a former wife a young daughter, but of an unparalleled goodness and sweetness of temper, which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. No sooner were the ceremonies of the wedding over, but the mother-in-law began to display her ill humour. She could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, and the less because they made her own daughter so much the more hated and despised. She employed her in the meanest work of the house. She cleaned the dishes and stands, and rubbed Madame's chamber, and those of the young Madames, her daughters. She lay on top of the house in a garret, upon a wretched straw bed, while her sisters lay in fine rooms, with all floors, all inlaid, upon beds of the newest fashion, and where they had looking-glasses so large that they might see themselves at full length, from head to foot. The poor girl bore all patiently, and dared not to tell her father, who would have rattled her off. Footnote, scolded her. For his wife governed him entirely. When she had done her work, she used to go into the chimney corner and sit down upon the cinders, which made her commonly be called in the house Cinderbreech. But the youngest, who was not so rude and uncivil as the eldest, called her Cinderilla. However, Cinderilla, notwithstanding her poor clothes, was 100 times handsomer than her sisters, though they wore the most magnificent apparel. Now, it happened that the king's son gave a ball and invited all persons of quality to it. Our young ladies were also invited, for they made a very great figure. They were very well pleased thereat, and were very busy in choosing out such gowns, petticoats, and head-clothes as might become them best. This was a new trouble to Cinderilla, for it was she that ironed their sisters' linen and plaited their ruffles. They talked all day long of nothing but how they should be dressed. For my part, said the eldest, I'll wear my red velvet suit with French trimming. And I, said the youngest, will have my common petticoat. But then, to make amends for that, I'll put on my gold-flowered manteau and my diamond stomacher, which is not the most indifferent in the world. They sent for the best tirewoman they could get to dress their heads and adjust their double pinners, and they had their red brushes and patches from Mrs. Delapoche. Cinderilla advised them the best in the world, and offered herself to dress their heads, which they were very willing she should do. As she was doing this, they said to her, Cinderilla, would you not be glad to go to the ball? Ah, said she, you only banter me. It is not for such as I am to go thither. You are in the right of it, said they. It would make the people laugh to see a Cinderbreech at a ball. Anyone but Cinderilla would have dressed their heads awry. Whoops, I skipped this voice change here. Ah, she said, you only banter me. It is not for such as I am to go thither. You are in the right of it, said they. It would make the people laugh to see a Cinderbreech at a ball. Anyone but Cinderilla would have dressed their heads awry. But oops, I missed it again. There are no quotation marks in this thing. Anyone but Cinderella would have dressed their heads awry, but she was very good and dressed them perfectly well. They were almost 2 days without eating, so much were they transported with joy. They broke above a dozen of laces in trying to be laced up close, that they might have a fine, slender shape, and they were continually at their looking-glass. At last the happy day came, they went to court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes as long as she could, and when she had lost sight of them, she fell a-crying. Her godmother, who saw her all in tears, asked her what was the matter. I wish I could. I wish I could. She could not speak the rest, her tears interrupting her. Her godmother, who was a fairy, said to her, Thou wishest thou couldst go to the ball, is it not so? Yes, said Cinderella with a great sob. Well, said her godmother, be but a good girl, and I'll contrive thou shalt go. Then she took into her chamber, and said to her, Go into the garden, and bring me a pumpkin. Cinderella went immediately to gather the finest she could get, and brought it to her godmother, not being able to imagine how this pumpkin could make her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped out all the inside of it. Having left nothing but the rind, she struck it with her wand, and the pumpkin immediately was turned into a fine coach, gilt all over with gold. After that she went to look into her mouse trap, where she found 6 mice all alive, and she ordered Cinderella to lift up a little the trap door, and she gave every mouse that went out a stroke with her wand, and the mouse was that moment turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a very fine set of 6 horses, of a beautiful mouse-coloured dapple grey. As she was at a loss for a coachman, I'll go and see, says Cinderella. If there be never a rat in the rat trap, we'll make a coachman of him. You are in the right, said her godmother. Go and see. Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy made choice of one of the 3, which had the largest beard, and having touched him with her wand, he was turned into a fat, jolly coachman that had the finest whiskers as ever were seen. After that she said to her, Go into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me. She had no sooner done so, but her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped up immediately behind the coach, with their liveries all bedaubed with gold and silver, and clung so close behind one another as if they had done nothing else all their lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, Well, you see here, in an equipage fit to go to the ball with. Are you not pleased with it? Oh, yes, said she, but must I go thither as I am, with these ugly, nasty clothes? Her godmother only touched her with her wand, and at the same instant her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. After this she gave her a pair of glass slippers, the finest in the world. Being thus dressed out, she got into a coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay beyond 12 o'clock at night, telling her at the same time that if she stayed at the ball one moment longer, her coach would be a pompion again, her horses mice, her footmen lizards, and her clothes resume their old form. She promised her godmother that she would not fail of leaving the ball before midnight, and then departed not a little joyful for her good fortune. The king's son, who was informed that the great princess, whom they did not know, was come, ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand as she alighted out of the coach, and led her into the hall where the company was. There was a great silence. They left off dancing, and the violin ceased to play. So attentive was everybody to contemplate the extraordinary beauties of this unknown person, there was heard nothing but a confused noise of, "Ha! How handsome she is! Ha! How handsome she is!" The king himself was as old as he was, could not help looking at her, and telling the queen in a low voice that it was a long time since he had seen so beautiful and lovely a creature. All the ladies were busied in considering her clothes and headdress, that they might have some made in the next day after the same pattern, supposing they might get such fine materials, and as able hands to make them. The king's son shewed her to the most honourable place, and afterwards took her out to dance with him. She danced with so much gracefulness that they more and more admired her. A fine collation was served up, of which the young prince ate nothing, so much was he taken up in looking upon her. She went and set herself down by her sisters, and shewed them 1,000 civilities. She gave them some of the oranges and lemons that the prince had presented her with, which very much surprised them, for they did not know her. While the company was thus employed, Cinderilla heard the clock go to 11 3/4, upon which she immediately made a courtesy to the company, and went away as fast as she could. As soon as she came home, she went to find out her godmother, and after having thanked her, she told her she could not but heartily wish to go the next day to the ball, because the king's son had desired her. As she was busy in telling her godmother everything that had passed at the ball, her 2 sisters knocked at the door. Cinderilla went and opened it. "You'd have stayed a long while," said she, gaping, rubbing her eyes, and stretching herself as if she'd just been awaked out of her sleep. She had, however, no manner of inclination to sleep since they went from home. "If thou hadst been at the ball," said one of her sisters, "thou wouldst not have been tired with it. There came thither the most beautiful princess, the most beautiful that was ever seen. She shewed us 1,000 civilities, and gave us oranges and lemons." Cinderilla seemed indifferent. She asked them the name of the princess, but they told her they did not know it, and that the king's son was very uneasy on her account, and would give all the world to know where she was. At this, Cinderilla smiled and said, she must then be very handsome indeed." "Lord, how happy have you been! Could I not see her?" "Ah, good Madam Charlotte, lend me your yellow suit of clothes that you wear every day." "Undoubtedly," said Madam Charlotte. "Lend my clothes to such a cinder-breech as you are. Who is a fool then?" Cinderilla was very glad of the refusal, for she would have been sadly put to it if her sister had lent her clothes. The next day the 2 sisters were at the ball, and so was Cinderilla, but dressed more richly than she was at first. The king's son was always by her, and saying abundance of tender things to her. The young lady was no ways tired, and forgot what her godmother had recommended to her, so that she heard the clock begin to strike 12, when she thought it was only 11. She then rose up and fled as nimble as deer. The prince followed her, but could not catch hold of her. She dropped one of her glass slippers, which the prince took up very carefully. Cinderilla came home quite out of breath, without coach or footman, and in her ugly old clothes. She had nothing left of all her finery but one of the little slippers. Fellow too that she dropped. The guards at the palace gate were asked if they had not seen a princess go out, who said they had seen nobody go out, but a young woman very badly dressed, and who had more the air of a poor country wench than a lady. When the 2 sisters returned from the ball, Cinderilla asked them if they had been well diverted, and if the fine lady had been there. They told her. Yes, but that she flew away as soon as it had struck 12 o'clock, and with so much haste that she dropped one of her little glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, and which the king's son had taken up, that he did nothing but look at her all the time of the ball, and that certainly he was very much in love with the beautiful person who owned the slipper. What they said was very true, for a few days after, the king's son caused it to be proclaimed by sound of trumpet that he would marry her whose foot this slipper would just fit. They began to try it on upon the princesses, then the duchesses, and then all the court, but in vain. It was brought to the two sisters, who did all they possibly could to thrust their foot into the slipper, but they could not effect it. Cinderilla, who saw all this and knew the slipper, said to them, laughing, "Let me see if it will not fit me." Her sisters burst out a-laughing and began to banter her. The gentleman who was sent to try the slipper looked earnestly at Cinderilla, and finding her very handsome, said it was but just that she should try, and that he had orders to let everybody do so. He made Cinderella sit down, and putting the slipper to her foot, he found it went in very easily, and fitted her as if it had been made of wax. The astonishment her two sisters were in was very great, but much greater when Cinderilla pulled out of her pocket the other slipper, and put it upon her foot. Upon this her godmother came in, who, having touched with her wand Cinderella's clothes, made them more rich and magnificent than ever they were before. And now her two sisters found her to be that fine beautiful lady that they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet, to beg pardon for all the ill treatment they had made her undergo. Cinderilla took them up, and told them as she embraced them that she forgave them with all her heart, and desired them to always love her. She was conducted to the young prince dressed as she was. He thought her more beautiful than ever, and a few days after married her. Cinderilla, who was as good as handsome, gave her two sisters lodgings in the palace, and married them the same day to two great lords of the court. That is the end of that one. The next story is called Little Pussy, or Hop o' My Thumb. Yeah. Come on, phone. Come on.